Hi, welcome to Training with Kayce. I'm your host, Kayce Cover. And tonight, let's talk about, are you a teacher or a trainer? Or are you both? What do you prefer to be? What's the difference? And what's the trade-off? Let's look at the critical difference between teaching and training and three skills which support our effectiveness at both teaching and training. So I'm both. I'm a teacher and I'm also a professional trainer. I'm also a leader. Now, how do these relate? And is leadership relevant? Come to think of it, I'm also a communicator and a motivator. When I say I'm a communicator, I spend a lot of my work time talking to people and also figuring out how to talk directly with animals. And I'm a motivator. I have to inspire people and animals to do things that I think will make their lives more successful. And for example, with animals, I might not even be able to use food. So we'll talk about this a little more further down, but let's look deeper. So I train and certify professional trainers and professional animals of most types. I've worked with over 120 species. I hold a Master of Science in Education, and I've been certified as a science teacher. Now, these days, I mostly teach. In the past, I mostly trained. So what gives? Well, a teacher transfers information effectively. A good teacher produces, a good trainer produces reliable performance in their subject. So one can teach another all kinds of information very effectively and never get any performance out of the study or out of the student. I've had the chance to observe many students and readers, and some of them never get off the sofa, much less go and apply what they have learned. In fact, in all the subjects I have studied or taught, application is a huge challenge for many or most students. It is for me. You learn how to do something, or you think you understand how to do something, and you start to do it, and you hit one little glitch that you can't get past, and it stops you in your tracks. So it curtails your ability to apply what you're learning about. So people tend to comprehend what you're describing or explaining without clearly seeing how that information can be put to use in their business or even their life, or without being motivated to put it to use. So they may not see how to put it to use in either their business or their life, or they may not be motivated to put it to use. I did more training in my past because I worked for organizations that wanted a product rather than a quality outcome. For example, I worked at one place that ran up to 14 demonstrations a day. Each demonstration needed the animals to reliably reproduce certain behaviors in order to illustrate the natural abilities and behaviors of these animals. So we, the trainers and presenters, would talk about the animals and their lives and natural adaptations, and the animals would demonstrate behaviors that show dramatic examples of those abilities and adaptations. The shows were about 15 minutes long and ran every half hour. The stadium could seat 1,500 people. The people could return to see a show as often as they wanted while at the aquarium. If the animals did not want to demonstrate the behaviors, it was no fun. It was no fun at all. Now, the whole point of all of this was to educate the audience. Our goal was to inspire and influence the audience to value the animals and want to continue to see and support them, both at the aquarium and in the wild. In fact, may not know this, but all accredited zoos and aquariums partner with conservation programs in the wild, helping the wild animals, even as they also help and study the animal at the zoo. Now, the people in the audience really seem to love the information and the learning experience. They returned again and again. They sometimes donated gifts for the animals, and they supported the conservation programs. They clapped vigorously for the animals and the trainers. And they could share the information they had learned with others. However, although they saw me again and again, actively training the animals right before their eyes, no audience member ever reported, and we talked to them a lot, by the way, training their horse to do a double backflip or a 23 feet high jump. I guess they just never listened. In fact, no audience member ever describes even trying these challenges. I guess they were all just lazy. Tisk, tisk. I taught volunteer docents lots of information about the animals at the National Zoo, and they were great at fielding questions, describing what was going on, and talking about the animals on exhibit. But likewise, they never talked about training or trying to train their own animals. Never even their children. Surely a kid could do a double backflip, right? But the keeper volunteers all learned to train our animals and to present demonstrations that allowed our visitors to see what the animals could and did do. In fact, we were able to engage the animals to show their personalities, which was what the audiences loved most. That's what I loved most too. Gosh, these animals were so smart and often very funny, very strategic, diabolical. They were great. The audience especially loved it when the animal played a joke on me, and that they did. There was the time that Maureen gently nudged me into the water, so I lost my footing and had to swim to the island to continue my talk. I told you I was a communicator, right? So I taught the docents, but I taught and trained both the keeper volunteers and the animals. The docents transferred information, but both the keeper volunteers and the animals were able to create my results. Now, it took intense teaching and coaching and testing and applied experience to lead those keeper volunteers and animals to learn to do their jobs reliably on request, even when things got challenging or even when they changed. And challenging they often were. Temperatures could be really cold or really hot, or the weather could be really windy, which is surprisingly difficult and tiring. It was usually really humid. The hours were long. Conditions were uncomfortable. And all that just relates to the humans. The animals had other additional challenges, like being pestered by another animal, babies, water conditions, vet visits, crowds, noise, and breeding season. Here is where my leadership abilities were put to the test. You may not realize this, but even if we use food to train, we don't use food to coerce an animal. In other words, they get what they need to eat every single day, even if they don't do anything. Some trainers tried to coerce animals. I won't give you this food unless you do this for me, in the 1960s. And the results caused professional trainers to switch strategies. If you don't feed an animal, he actually can lose his appetite entirely to the point where it can even stunt his growth. And he still won't do what you want him to do. He will not do what you demand for food. On the other hand, I work animals without food on a regular basis. During my own training work, sometimes just because I don't have food or I don't want to use food, or, if the animal is getting ready for a medical procedure, you can't give them food. So when I'm helping, when I work my own animals, I may not use food. And when I'm helping other people with their animals, especially at seminars where they come to work with me for help with their animals sometimes will not take food. If they get a little tense, if they have food allergies, they may not, have food that they can eat. It goes on and on. Anyway, you need to be able to communicate and motivate with animals and inspire them to collaborate with you for other reasons, not because of food. So when it comes to leadership, I started out with some ability, but I had flaws. Even though I'd been studying this topic since I was 6 years old. My father was in Naval Officer Candidate School. And I remember he was opening up his book to study, and I was standing by his knee. And the first subject was leadership. And so I asked him, "What is that?" And he explained it to me. And then he continued to teach me about leadership for the rest of my life, really, or the rest of his life. So I had a good start, but I had flaws, but I persevered. I kept honing my skills until, for an example, I was able to recruit 120 docents and 40 keeper volunteers and engage them to work for the zoo for free. They did this reliably, always, showing up when they said they would, and with excellence. They were amazing. In fact, when I went on vacation, the zoo called in keeper volunteers to man my area, just having staff keepers check in with them from time to time. These keeper volunteers contributed 15,000 man hours in the first 5 years I worked for the zoo. That is, excuse me, I'll take some water. That's 7.5 man years that the zoo and I did not pay for. And a number of these volunteers went on to lead in the training industry. Some became leaders in other related fields like veterinary medicine. So what changed? Why did I go from being a trainer to being a teacher? In the last 10 years, my focus has been on processing my teaching materials into classes that support trainers in mastering the SATS training techniques. So I've been teaching a lot of trainers, and like I hone my leadership, I am honing my materials, and I want to get them all secured and online so that even if something happens to me, people will still be able to study and master SATs and put it in service to the animals and the people they work with. I now teach mostly people more than animals, and I teach both dedicated pet owners and professional trainers. Now, professional pet trainers mostly train for dedicated pet owners. And I'm having trouble saying it. And dedicated pet owners turn out to prefer educated, collaborative dogs or pets over highly trained dogs. They tend to want a quality outcome rather than a product. They want a harmonious lifestyle rather than a championship tango dancing dog. If their dog will honor the house rules, be polite, and contribute to family harmony, the owner seldom cares if they learn formal obedience. And with SATs, we are constantly and consistently teaching our animals. That is, we're sharing information with them and giving them the chance to learn about things. And they consistently buy in to being responsible community members. And then we don't care so much if they do formal obedience. I mean, it is so easy to talk to a dog and just explain what you want rather than micromanage their behavior. So here again is where leadership makes a difference. Leadership, in the best cases, is where someone with a position of oversight engages in service to the others in the work group or family in order to lead them to more successful, safer, healthier, happier, and longer lives. It is a job of service more than a job of power. This was one of my early flaws, by the way. And although some so-called leaders have not figured this out, when those being led see that the leader is securing a better outcome for them and empowering them and including them and negotiating with their well-being in mind, then they tend to buy into that effort. It really helps if the leader is an effective communicator and motivator. And in SATs, that's a whole specialty of its own, and that deserves its own podcast. So we'll dive into that more on another time, but let's summarize. A teacher shares information and knowledge. A trainer shares the ability to perform a job on request, not just store information, but the ability to apply that information. A leader influences and inspires others to collaborate because the leader elevates the life experience of the led. And communication expertise and motivation expertise make a leader, a teacher, or a trainer more effective and efficient at accomplishing their goals. Which you want or needs depends on what your priorities are with the animals you work with. But SATS is a great way to excel at any or all of these skills and goals. I hope you decide you want to be both a teacher and a trainer, and also a leader, communicator, and a motivator, which is useful in no matter what you do for your main career. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me. As always, your comments are so appreciated. I mean, it helps us on a practical basis so much every time you like an episode But when you comment, I feel like I actually connect with you, and I love answering your comments. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon. Good night.